Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar this evening with the Clinician Engineer Hub, our network that aims to bridge the gap between medicine and engineering. Now, I'm very excited to have Celia Cruz here, live from Portugal, and she's going to be talking about medical device regulation. She is the head of regulatory affairs for her company, Complear Health, so I'm very excited that she's here. Now, clinicians, engineers, we all get very excited at developing new devices and tools and platforms to help our patients. But I think one of our downfalls is that we know very little about the regulation side. It's not something that is taught to us, and we try and figure it out along the way. So I think it's very important that we have an international expert in this field to talk to us today so we can all learn something. Hi, Celia, how are you?
Hi, Neel. First of all, thank you for inviting me today. I think it'll be, I'm really happy to be here and talk to you a little bit about medical devices. I really love to talk about this topic. So I'm really happy to talk to different backgrounds on this. And it's like you're saying, when you look at these regulations, sometimes you look at just close to the end, you don't know really well what is this, and I want to bring some light, some introduction to what is this and what does it mean.
Fantastic. I look forward to your presentation.
Well, so like I was saying, this is going to be just a beginner's look. I'm going to start by explaining a little bit what are medical devices and what is this, and the step-by-step into what should you do to ensure that in the end you're going to have something that can go into the market, because if it fits within the medical device field, well, it needs to comply with certain steps to go to there. First of all, what is a medical device? I mean, some of them are really easy to understand. I think everyone will think of MRI machine or a pacemaker or a wheelchair, knows that you're dealing with medical device, right? Of course, that there are some areas there can be blurry whether something is a medical device or not. And those are the tricky ones to understand. I mean, if you're doing an implant or if you're doing any of those devices I mentioned before, I suppose you have no doubt that you have a medical device. In some cases, for example, within software as medical devices or some devices that may be applicable in certain areas, you may have some doubts. So to start with, I just have here a brief definition of what is a medical device. The typical trick to understand where you have a medical device is that if you have something, and I mean an instrument, an apparatus, or software, an implant, something that has a medical purpose. And that's very important. And when I say medical purpose, I mean it can be diagnostic, it can be prevention, monitoring, treatment, replacement or modification of an anatomy. This is, for example, contact lenses or glasses would fall into these. Prognosis, prediction. One important thing. This should be in a physical or mechanical means, and not by pharmacological or immunological or metabolic means, because if that's the case, you're most likely talking about a medicine or a drug. So sometimes you're working like in the between, and this is the distinction, whether something's more mechanical or physical medical device, when something is more pharmacological, immunological, or metabolic will fall within the medicines and drugs. And that's why sometimes you may see or may have seen, or maybe that's something you're working with, that you look at it and it looks like something that would be a medicine, but apparently it works by physical means and it ends up being regulated by the medical devices. So also devices for the control or supporting conception, or for cleaning and disinfection, sterilization of devices, that will also fall within this definition of medical devices. One important thing, the regulation, the legislative framework of this, previously there was a directive, and since 2021, the medical devices have a new regulation, the medical device regulation, that brings more oversight and is more has more you need to have to comply more with, for example, clinical evidence, post-market surveillance, bring more evidence to ensure your safety and the performance of your solution. And actually, this came up because of there was some scandals some time ago. For example, the breast implants in France some decades ago, that they were using a different grade of the silicone, and there were several people injured, and that showed that the new regulations were not looking into ensuring the post-market and vigilance of the devices. And that was one of the things that made that the EU understand that, okay, we need to update this and ensure more regulation. Another one was regarding the metal and metal implants. So there were implants that had, I think, metal on metal, that were releasing metal to the bloodstream, which caused also several cases of damages to people. Again, not an adequate vigilance after being on the market, understanding of the different consequences, and that's why these new regulations appeared. And also because there are more new technologies. I mean, we have nanomaterials, we have software, and those were not really properly covered under the previous directive. So there's more oversight also into new devices, and that's why there's these new regulations. And I was mentioning the medical device regulation from 2021. But there's also the in vitro diagnostics device regulation. I didn't talk about that before, the definition of in vitro diagnostic. It's very similar to the medical device, but it's when it is used for analysis of in vitro analysis of specimens. So if it's something that is taken out of the body, and a specimen that taken out of the body, I mean blood, saliva, other type of fluid or tissue that comes out of the body and it's going to be assessed outside, it falls within the in vitro diagnostic. And it falls under the IVDR that had this date of application almost 1 year ago, so 11 months ago. And in 2022. Both of these regulations also bring the same type of oversight, one from one device, another for the other, but in general, they are very, very similar, of course, with some particularities of these different type of devices. And like I was mentioning, that the biggest thing to understand whether something is a medical device or not is the medical purpose. And to understand if you're a medical purpose, you need to define your intended purpose. So if you're developing a medical device, or you're developing something that may fall within a medical device, you need to understand and define what is your intended purpose, what you want to do with it. Who is going to use it, in which situations that is going to be used, and where it's going to be used, which patients are going to be using it. And that needs to be aligned. And now if you're looking for in a startup, Sometimes you want to be able to say everything and having the materials and in the marketing say that you will do everything. Well, that's great, but that needs to be aligned with your intended purpose. So you're not going to be able to say that for marketing purpose, you're going to, I don't know, diagnose cancer or treat cancer, and for the regulatory part saying, oh, we are going just to give some indicator that together with something else will be able to support the diagnosis of cancer. So you need to have this aligned and within an intended purpose. And that is also going to be assessed, of course, later on by regulatory entities, but this needs to be the start. What you want to be able to do with that device. And sometimes you may even have different opinions or different solutions, or, okay, I'm going to start with this, and then I'm going to also be able to do this. That's fine, but you need to understand and clarify what you want to do first and what you're going to do next, because they may have different pathways to the market and different consequences to the market. And understanding, for example, the classification of the device or the oversight that something's, or the tests that may be needed, depending on what you claim, you may understand, okay, I'm going to start in a smaller way, not be too ambitious, and then work around into, I'm going to be able to say more and gather more evidence, but maybe I'm going to be able to go to the market faster and then doing some adjustments so that I'm going to be able to say more. So it's really important to define what is your intended purpose. Especially if you're in the borderline of some things, whether if you're a medical device or not, or whether you're what you want to claim to do, diagnosis, supporting diagnosis, doing some treatment. It's really important to have it clear, and that's really going to guide everything else that you do in the regulatory. So, some rationale for this: what you want to do with it, who is going to use it, when will it be used, what is the patient population that is going to be used. And I mean, typically, for example, we just have studies in adults or in a narrow patient population, maybe start with there and then grow up. For example, for children, sometimes it's more difficult group to assess, but of course will depend on what you have. Maybe it's already specific for children, then there's no way around, for elderly, etc. Also the disease state, for example, if you have something for a life-threatening situation, it's important to understand, okay, it's going to be used for the life-threatening, or it's going to be used like in early stage. So understand what is going to be the situation. And of course, this also needs to be balanced with what are your results, what you have, and also what's your business strategy, what is needed, and what's on the market. So all these should be aligned and make sense for you. What are the important features and attributes? How will the user and the patients interact with the device? What type of procedures will the device be used for, like in the hospital, in clinics, at home? What procedure is going to be used? What is the clinical workflow, and is going to change the typical clinical workflow or not? What type of environment it's used? If it's going to be used once or a lot of times. And for example, if you have something that for surgery, for example, it's going to be reusable, not reusable, it's going to be sterilized, not going to be sterilized. All those kind of things are important. That's going to affect also the type of material that you use. So it's really, really important to, and of course, there may be different possibilities in the beginning, but you need to have those clear, understand the consequences of those. And what other products will the device interact and interface with them. Also, because we live in a connected world, a lot of solutions have now an interface or a software interface, or going to connect with wearables, or going to be connected with, I don't know. There's so many possibilities, but it's important to understand what you want to do. Again, maybe in the beginning it may make sense. Okay, I want to be able to connect with everything and every electronic health record, and to be able to connect to every type of connected device. But then you understand, okay, let's start with what is feasible, what can I prove for now, and then maybe later on understand what else can I add. So understanding what is intended purpose, or the different possibilities of your intended purpose, is really important to understand what are the different possibilities for your strategy. Just an example, what is a medical device, what is not, and how the intended purpose is really important. We have, for example, an app typically connected to a wearable that measures heart rate and heart rhythm. And depending what you want it to be used for, I mean, whether it's for wellness or for detecting, for example, atrial fibrillation, it can be or not be a medical device. So if it's used for wellness, not a medical device. If it's used for atrial fibrillation, fits within a medical device because it has a medical purpose and it clearly wants to have a medical purpose. So it's really important. Again, this needs to be aligned with your marketing and of course your business strategy, but it's important that you define what you want to do. And perhaps if you have a similar situation, it may make sense. Okay, I'm going to start with wellness because I can go to the market tomorrow. And then I'm going to have gain some traction, even though it's in a different area. But I'm going to get some sales from this, and then I'm going to work it out and improve and gather evidence so that I can go to be a medical device with this certain claim, detecting atrial fibrillation, for example, and then perhaps I'm going to do more claims, more diseases, or I'm going to do a bigger claim, or keep it like that. So it's important to understand, define really the intended purpose for now and for what you see the foreseeable future, so that you understand what is going to happen, what you need to do with your solution as early as possible, because it is really important for you to understand whether something is feasible or it's going to be taking several years and millions of dollars to get there. So it's really important that you understand. So it's really important to have this intended purpose well defined and consistent with what you say, and then with the documentation that you're going to have, and that is also aligned with the business strategy of your company. I mean, if you're already talking with doctors and saying, I'm going to have something for detecting atrial fibrillation, but then you have something that is just for wellness, does not make any sense. Probably you'll need then to align your business strategy. Does it make sense? So everything needs to be make sense for you and be aligned. And you may think these is details, but have really a big impact. And sometimes trying to understand these different possibilities, it may be more useful to speak with, for example, some consultants in that area, have just a chat, or have assessing a regulatory strategy, because this may shape the future, and this may be something that, when talking, for example, with investors, may be useful to know. So we're going to tell them, I'm going to do this because this is the pathway, or I'm not going to do that because there's something. For some cases, of course, this is clear. I mean, if we're developing an implant, or if you're developing pacemaker, most likely, and I'm saying most likely because there are also maybe some nuance, but most likely you have your intended purpose more or less well defined, and there's not that many change that may affect. But in other cases, and especially, for example, in software, or something that are more borderline between drug device, for example, that, or you may want to make some claims, this may be really important to do this strategy. So first, you understand, okay, am I a medical device or not? I really need to define the intended purpose. And then based with that intended purpose, you're going to classify your device. In the EU, because, and I'm talking about the regulation in the EU, this is the classification is from 1 to 3. So it's 1, then the class 2 has a subdivision, class 2A, 2B, and 3. 3 being the highest classified. For example, pacemakers, automatic defibrillators, prosthetic heart valves. So this is high-risk devices. So they are typically classified as class 3. While, for example, wheelchairs or bandages, those are lower classes, lower risk class, and so they are class 1. And the one thing that's important, yeah, no, I didn't write it here. It's that class 1 device is going to have their process to the market in an easier way because they are lower risk. You need to comply with everything. I'm going to tell you later on what is everything, but you need to comply with everything, and then you prepare a declaration of conformity, and you can put your device on the market because you self-declare that you're in conformity with everything. For class 2A, 2B, and 3, and some special classifications within 1, for example, if you have do some measurements, or if you have you need to be sterilized, for example, if you're a surgical device, or if you need reprocessing, again, surgical devices, you're also going to fall within another pathway where you need to have an entity assessing your conformity. This entity is going to be, it's called the notified body, and they are going to assess if you really comply with everything that you say you do. I'm going to talk about it later on, but just to show that having the different classes may impact your strategy to the market. In order to have a brief idea how does the classification work, there are some key concepts. So the classification will be also according to the duration that, for example, something is in contact with the body, or invasive, or how invasive, for how long it is being invasive in the body. And also if it's active or non-active. So if there's some energy source from there. So these are some of the 3 considerations that are taken into account for how risky is the device. And in the EU, this is done. How you know your classification? There's a set of rules, classification rules, written in the regulation in this Annex 8, that determine whether your which risk class it is. For example, if you're invasive and you do something blah blah blah, then you're class 3. If you're blah blah blah, then you're class 2A. So this kind of classification rules. To support, there's a guidance also that the European Commission or some groups within the European Commission gathered and launched some guidance documents, and there's one for the classification of medical devices. This is one MDCG 2021-24, and has a better description of what do they mean with certain rules and some examples also. It's really useful, and you can have a better understanding what does it mean. If you're working with a kind of more typical device, most likely it will be represented there already. If you're working with new technologies, it's unclear. So it is normal that in some cases then you get in doubt, what do they mean by this, and words can be really important. The interpretation of what do some words mean can be crucial to understand whether you fall within one class or the other. So having the understanding of what do they mean by that in this guidance document can be really useful. So after you understand your intended purpose, your device classification, so you have all that, then you need to start preparing for your certification. And one thing that's really important and should be done as early as possible within the development, or at least part of it should be started as early as possible of the development of the solution, is have a quality management system.